Hey there, class. Faisal here with your class for July 21st. So your midterms should now be out, right? So the way to see them, as I've mentioned in class, is you go here and you click on grades. Let me just view that as a student. Right, so you click on grades, and what you will see is over here, there'll be your marks for everything that you've done so far in the class, right? And then up top, you'll see some sort of number, right? That's like this, right? Where it says final adjusted grade, and it'll be weight achieved, and there'll be a number out of 70. I tried to change that to a percentage, but I don't know how. This is a weird website. In order to get your grade, you might have to just divide whatever it is, right? Just like you would do on any assignment, and that's your grade there, right? So just divide 63.4 out of 70 or whatever it is, right? So that's how you figure out what your grade is. In terms of how it's calculated, right? What you should see in the thing is that all of the things are weighted, right? So, for instance, the reflection assignments were 10% of your grade. The short story responses were 25. The MLA assignment is 20, or not the MLA, the writing assignment, particularly the essay, was worth 25, and your seminar participations are out of 10, right? So that's how it's calculated for now. So the thing to know is that these assignments are all weighted, so please don't try to cross-reference the marks or get out your calculator and do it that way, right? Because a weighted average is not an average. So, for instance, the midterm essay, right, is worth much more than the MLA checkup, right? The MLA checkup is worth probably 2% of your mark, probably going to be 1% later on, right? Whereas the midterm essay is worth probably about 20%, right? Because it's a big essay. So don't just say, hey, why is my mark low? Because I did the average and I added them all together and I divided by 9 or whatever it is we have here. Don't do that. It's a weighted average, right? So please keep that in mind. So in terms of how do you raise your grade, right? Let's do that. Oh well, actually, before I talk about that, if you've got any zeros on any of the assignments, right? If you have a 0 on a reflection or anything like that, it's because of one of two reasons. Option 1, you didn't hand it in, right? And if you don't hand something in, right, some of you have handed things in late and I've been really easygoing about that, right? But if you're at this point and you haven't handed in like a reflection assignment from the first week, then my question is, what are you doing? This is summer school, guys. Your marks have to be in fast, right? The course is in its last 10 days, 9 days now. So you gotta be faster than that, right? You got a 0 if you haven't handed something in, including the essay, by the way. The essay was due yesterday, right? As I said to everyone. So if you got a 0, it's because of that. Or the other reason you would get a 0 is if you plagiarized, right? And you guys know who you are, right? I've sent messages back, right? And the website does automatically show that show me when you plagiarize something. So again, don't even think about it. So if you plagiarize something, you got a 0 as well, right? So if you have any zeros, that's why you've got a 0. So how do you raise your grades, right? You've got 3 things to do that with. As I talked about yesterday, you've got 2 reactions, right, including the Othello one from today. You've got 2 seminars, one on Wednesday and one next Monday. And most importantly, you've got your final essay, which is worth 30% of your grade, right? So that's how you raise your grade. So if you're at like 77 right now, it's still very possible for you to score an 80 or even higher by doing well on those assignments, right? There are not going to be any bonus assignments in this class. and there are not going to be any redos, right? So once I've given you a mark, that's your mark, right? So I'm not going to let you, do the essay again or do assignment again, right? That's not something I can or am willing to do in summer school. So we're at midterms, right? And I do hope that most of you understand where you are. This is a short class, and it's difficult for everyone to do well, right? This is really, when you're in summer school, it's a 3.5 week class. If you're not already in command of like your commas, your spelling, and all of that, getting that to a 90 plus in 3 weeks is a difficult thing, right? So, I understand if you're having difficulties. So, if you think you need to drop the course, right? If you're thinking, I can't do this, right? I'm doing this and that at the same time and it's just too hard, right? You can drop the course by going into content here, right? And then over here it says administrative forms, right? And you're going to hit drop the course, right? And then you just click on this form, right? And it will ask you like your name, student number, and the course you want to drop, right? And you can do it that way. I'm not encouraging anyone to do that. I don't really like it when my students drop. But if you're looking at the rest of this class and looking at Othello and thinking, oh God, how am I supposed to do that in a week? And my mark is only 56 or something like that, then you can indeed drop the course if you so wish. So, that's how we're looking right now, right? And if you have any further questions about your midterm, you can always contact me, right? So that's what we're doing here. Now, let's get to Othello, right? We're going to finish Act 1 and talk about Act 2 as well today. So I'm going to turn it over here to the long-haired version of me. So, we left off last time with Iago reporting Othello to his new father-in-law, unwilling father-in-law, Brabanchio, and he's going to arrest him, right? So, let's talk a little bit about Othello today, and then I will give you your question of the day, and we'll go from there. So, we've been hearing about Othello before this point, but we haven't actually met him. And, well, we've got his first speech here in the first act. Let's take a look. So this is on page 15 of your PDF there, right? Act 1, Scene 2, line 17, right? Othello says, let him do his spite. My services which I have done, the signatory shall out-tongue his complaints. Yet 'tis to know which when I know that boasting is an honour, I shall promulgate. I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, and my demerits may speak unbonneted as to as proud a fortune as this that I have reached. For no Iago, but that I love the gentle Desdemona, I would not my unhoused free condition put into circumscription and confine for the sea's worth. So, couple of things come up in this speech. The first is what I hope is obvious when you read this or when you hear this, if you watch the film version. Othello is pretty eloquent, right? He's well spoken, right? He's got just as much vocabulary as everyone else, right? So he's a well spoken and eloquent guy, right? He knows what he's doing, right? You'll remember Iago was calling him a horse and a thick lips and all sorts of nasty stuff in the previous scene, but here we see the guy's looking pretty intelligent. Second, that whole thing, I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, right? And we'll see royal siege, where's 10? There it is, means that he's descended from royalty. So what that means is that Othello is a noble, right? So he came from Africa and he was, a relative of some African kings, right? So that's what he means by royal siege. So we see that right away here in the opening scene. But nevertheless, Othello is under arrest, right? He is arrested right at the beginning of the play here by Brabanchio, who you should remember, Brabanchio is an important senator in the city, right? So he has the authority to do that kind of thing, right? Even though he's a senator, by the way, it doesn't mean he's elected, right? He's just a super rich guy, right? So a nobleman, right? This is not a democracy. So nevertheless, he's arrested and brought to the Duke. Now, first of all, let's talk about let's start with why Othello has been arrested. Actually, let's start with that. So, what's the crime? So, the marriage itself is not a crime, right? Because even if the father did not want that to happen, it occurred in a church, right, and was done by a priest. And when you have a marriage like that, you can't just say, "Oh, that's illegal," right? Because the church, right, is the one to ordain the marriage, so therefore they're married, right? So you can't arrest someone for just that. So the charge that Brabanchio is bringing against Othello is actually witchcraft, right? So let me see here. He says in Act 1, Scene 3, line 94, so this is Brabanchio talking, when he's talking about Othello, right? So this is on page 27 of your PDF. Brabanchio says, "A maiden never bold of spirit, so still and quiet that her motion blushed at herself, and she, in spite of nature, of years, of country, credit, everything, to fall in love with what she feared to look on. It's a judgment maimed and most imperfect that will confess perfection, so could err against all rules of nature, and must be driven to find out practices of cunning hell. Why this should be, I therefore vouch again, that with some mixtures powerful over the blood, or with some dram conjured to this effect, he wrought upon her." Right? So, let's just check some of the vocabulary there, as you should do, right? A dram is a mixture of fluid or something like that, right? So it's sort of a potion. So what this guy is saying is that Othello here got Desdemona to fall in love with him using magic, right? So the accusation is that Othello has cast a spell or brewed a love potion and given that to Desdemona, and that's why she's married him, right? So essentially it's saying that Desdemona did not actually consent to this marriage, right? Instead, Othello has used magic in order to make her do that. So, let me put this up top. This is racist, and it's racist for two reasons, right? First, the magic idea, right? It's not a coincidence that this is an accusation being leveled against our African protagonist, right? Because the idea was that Africans would use magic because they were from non-Christian backgrounds, right? You might even know the term black magic, right? So the idea here is that, Othello casts some kind of spell on Desdemona here, right? And he can do that because he's African, right? So that's our first bit of racism that we're seeing here. Second, there's the idea also that Desdemona would only marry him if there were magic involved, right? As he says here, "A maiden never so bold of spirit, so still and quiet that her motion blushed at herself, and she, in spite of natures, of years, of country, credit, everything, to fall in love with what she feared to look on." Right? So the idea there is that Desdemona couldn't have fallen in love with Othello legitimately because she is too pure. She's, this pure white girl, and there's no way that white girl could ever have fallen in love with Othello. So that's the accusation. That's why Othello is being arrested, right? So it's a very much a racial thing, right? It's not a crime. You can't arrest someone just for marrying their daughter without permission, right? Because the church is the church, and if the church says two people are married, they're married. You can't say something a church did is illegal. So Brabanchio's reasons are racial, right? It's all about Othello's skin color. Now, before we talk about the trial, we should understand quickly the political situation, right? So Venice controls an island called Cyprus. Maybe it'd be good if I pull up the map. So Venice is up here, Cyprus is over here, right? And there is going to be an invasion by the Turkish army, right? Or Turkish fleet, I should say, of Cyprus, right? They're going to send their fleet to take this island here, right? They already have most of the things around it, so they're saying, yeah, let's go take over Cyprus. And Venice wants to defend Cyprus. Now, Othello is the general of the army, right? And so, oops, this is the wrong, there it is. So Othello is, the guy who's supposed to lead the army against the Turkish invasion. He's the best guy that Venice has, right? And so if you arrest Othello, well, then who's going to lead the army? So this sort of tells you some of the plan that the plan that Othello had when he married Desdemona, right? If you're thinking, well, why would Othello marry Desdemona when he's going to get in all this trouble? Well, he knows that that he's needed, right? And they're going to desperately need him, so he can do this kind of thing. So before we even talk about his speeches, this tells you that this guy is no fool, right? It's not like he just thought, oh, Desdemona's so hot, I want to be with her, I love her so much, right? And I'm going to marry her, so let's do it, and who cares what happens? No, this guy had a plan, right, to make it successful, because he knows very well that if he's going to be leading the army, then Venice can't exactly arrest him for something like that, right? Because they need him. So that tells you this guy's got a good brain. So that brings us to the trial, right? So he's put on trial for these things, and he responds to the accusation, right? And this is an important speech. Let me even note it. It's on page 29, Act 1, Scene 3, line 128. Let me even put it here. Act 1, Scene 3, line 128, right? So, important speech here for Othello. So what Othello says is, her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life from year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. I ran it through, even from my boyish days, to the very moment that he bade me tell it, wherein I spake of most disastrous chances, of most moving accents by flood and field, of hairbreadth escapes, in the imminent deadly breach, of being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery, of my redemption thence and portents, and in my travels history, wherein the entrees vast and deserts idle, rough quarries, rocks, and hills whose heads touch heaven. It was my hint to speak, such was the process, and of the cannibals that each other eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. This to hear would Desdemona seriously incline, but still the house affairs would draw her thence, whichever as she could, with haste dispatch, she'd come again, and with a greedy ear devour up my discourse, which I observing took once a pliant hour, and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart, that I would all my pilgrimage dilate, whereof by parcels she had something heard, but not intentively. I did consent, and often did beguile her of her tears, when I did speak of such distressful stroke that my youth suffered. My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She swore in faith 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she'd had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me, and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint I spake. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I have used. Here comes the lady, let her witness it. So, first of all, let's look at this carefully. Othello says her father loved me, oft invited me. Her father, by the way, is Brabanchio. So Brabanchio would invite Othello to his house because apparently Othello was his friend, which might strike you as kind of odd considering now he's arrested him, right? But he invited him as a friend to his house and wanted to hear all these stories, right? So he wanted to hear about him fighting in Africa, right? Being sold into slavery, escaping from slavery, right? Seeing all of these crazy things like men whose heads grow beneath their shoulders. He wants to hear all those stories because apparently he found them interesting, right? So Brabanchio was inviting him over to his house as a friend, right? So he did that. But then, as he's doing that, Desdemona hears the stories and fell in love with him legitimately, right? So this is the real way they fell in love, right? You know, there's nothing with magic, there are no love potions, there's no enchantments or anything like that, right? He got Desdemona to fall in love with him legitimately, because Desdemona hadn't ever met anyone like this before, right? This is someone completely new to her, right? So, you know, of course, Desdemona, you know, is interested, and that's how they fall in love, right? So this is Othello's response, and, you know, no one can really say anything against that, especially since Desdemona comes in right after that and confirms it, right? She says, "My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty." This is just on the same page, by the way, line 180. "To you I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. You are the lord of duty. I am hitherto your daughter, but here's my husband. And so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more, my lord." Right? So Desdemona sort of confirms, yeah, that's what happened. You know, I'm married to this guy now, and it was consensual, no magic involved, so therefore, well, they're married. So it's confirmed, and this is what sort of gets Othello exonerated. So, the first act of the play is pretty interesting, right? And we see that there's a lot of racial things that are thrown at Othello right at the beginning, right? You know, that he's this, he's that, he's a horse, he's black magic user, right? That he put Desdemona under a mind control spell or love potion or something like that, right? There's all sorts of things like that in the first act of the play. But ultimately, it's all nonsense, right? And it all gets shut down, right? Because, you know, Othello defeats all of the racists in the first act, right? You know, all these people that wanted to tear him down and throw him in jail, right? He comes out on top. He is the winner of the first act because guess what? You know, he gets to get married to Desdemona, right? And on top of that, he also gets to, you know, lead the army, maintain his position, everything like that. So he's the big winner, right? He's looking great, right? Because, well, he planned it out, he spoke well, and everything like that. But, there's a but, and this brings us to our question of the day. So, at the end of that act, which I hope you've read, and I hope you've, by the way, also seen, right? Remember what I said about watching the play, right? That's very important. At the end of this act, before everyone goes off to leave, the Duke says something very interesting. Let's see here. So the Duke, by the way, the Duke is the guy in charge of the city. He's sort of the head honcho, right? We don't see much of him. He doesn't even have a name. He's just Duke of Venice. But he says something very interesting here towards the end of the play, where he says, "And, noble signor, if virtue no delighted beauty lack, your son-in-law is far more fair than black." Right? So that's what he says to Brabanchio to cheer him up, right? Saying, oh, don't worry, your son-in-law is far more fair than black. Huh. So, back to me here on the present day. So, that brings us to our assignment of the day, right? Your question, which I gave yesterday, about Othello, right? So, you're going to have 2 of these this week. So, the question is, as I've mentioned, here, let me copy and paste and make it bigger. Bing, bang, boom. So the question is, Othello's first act ends with the Duke saying, "In virtue no delighted beauty lack, your son-in-law is far more fair than black." Analyze this statement and explain what it tells us about the world Othello is living in. So, what I mean by this question is, what's this Duke really saying here when he's saying that your son-in-law is more fair than black? With the word fair, of course, meaning white, right? So, essentially what he's saying there seems to be, well, yeah, your son is black, sure, but if you really think about it, right, if we think about his qualities and his virtues, and everything like that, right, he's really not black, he's white, right? So, the Duke is at the top of society, right? He's the ruler of the place, right? He runs the city, he runs the army, Othello works for him, everyone works for him, right? He's the ruler. And he's the one who's saying this, right? So we can take what he's saying there as representative of what what Othello's society really is all about. Right, so what I want you to do in your answer here, which is, by the way, going to be about a paragraph, right, a short paragraph. You can write 2 paragraphs if you've got a lot to say, sure. But what I'd like you to do is just tell me, okay, what does this tell us about the world that Othello is living in, right? How does this tell us more about Othello's situation, right? So think about that line, right, and give me just a single paragraph, right? Not maybe as long as the first reflections, but probably doesn't even have to be that long. Just a single paragraph that analyzes this question, right? And that one's going to be due tonight at midnight. But there's more to say about Othello, so I'm going to turn it back over to the long-haired version of... Anyway, so women in the Shakespearean era, right, are expected to be property of 2 men in their life, right? First your father, and then your husband, right? So, Desdemona, she defied her father, which is not what women were generally supposed to do. But you should know she's still dutiful to her husband, right? She's loyal, and she hasn't done anything that could be considered sinful, right? Because even if you marry without your father's permission, right, you're still married, right? So it's not adultery, it's not anything like that. So she is not sinful, and the way she acts and behaves, right? For instance, where is that? On line 249 on page 35 of the PDF, Desdemona says, here it is. What does the Duke asks, "What would you, Desdemona?" And Desdemona says that I did love the more to live with him. My downright violence and storm of fortunes may trumpet to the world, my heart subdued to the very quality of my lord. I saw Othello's visage in his mind, and to his honour and his valiant parts did I my soul and fortunes consecrate, so that, dear lords, if I be left behind a moth of peace and he go to war, the rights for which I love him are bereft me, and I a heavy interim shall support by his dear absence. Let me go with him. So, she wants to stay with Othello, and she wants to be next to this guy always, right? So this tells us that she is a very devoted wife, and I can tell you that the word duty and devoted, right, those two D words, are music to the ears of Shakespeare's audience, right? So Shakespeare's audience loves this girl, right? They're thinking, oh, what a great girl, right? And the male audience might be thinking, oh, I wish I were married to someone like that, right? So dutiful and devoted and everything like that. So the audience really likes Desdemona for that reason, right? So again, the two big D's for her are duty and devotion, right? So that's how she is for Othello, sort of an ideal wife for the Shakespeare's times, right? So I'll have more to say about women in Shakespeare's era as we go along here, but for now, let's focus on that. The other thing I want to briefly talk about is soliloquies, right? So those of you who studied Macbeth with me will hopefully remember that a soliloquy is when a character stands up on the stage and tells you how they feel, right? It's when they are speaking their thoughts to the audience, and no one lies in a soliloquy. So, in this act, everything goes well for Othello. Everything's been great, right? But there is, of course, one guy who is, still sort of in the background causing trouble, right? And that's Iago, right? So at the very end of the act, right? Act 1, Scene 3, line 386, right? On page 43 of your PDF, right? Iago says, and this is a soliloquy, so he's speaking to the audience. Thus do I ever make my fool my purse, for I mine own gained knowledge should profane, if I would time expend with such a snipe, but for my sport and profit. And here's the important part. I hate the Moor, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he has done my office. I know not if it be true, but I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do it as if for surety. He holds me well, the better shall my purpose work on him. Cassio's a proper man. Let me see now, to get his place and to plume up my will in double knavery. How, let's see, after some time to abuse Othello's ear, that he is too familiar with his wife. He hath a person and a smooth dispose to be suspected and framed to make women false. The Moor is of a free and open nature that makes men honest that but seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. I have it, it is engendered, hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light. So, Iago, right, first of all, he hates the Moor, right, the Moor is Othello, because it is thought abroad, meaning there is a rumor that twixt my sheets he has done my office. And let's see what the footnote says about that, 122. He has slept with my wife, right? So, there's a rumor going around, right? And I do emphasize the word is rumor that Othello had sex with his wife, right? So there's no proof of that. We'll come back to that later. But, that's the rumor going around, right? He doesn't know himself if it's true, right? But as it says here, I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do as if for surety, right? So he's going to act as if he's certain. That's how angry he is. And he's got a plan, right? He's going to go after Cassio, right? And make Othello think that Cassio, right, who you'll remember is the guy that got the job that Iago wanted, right? So he's going to tell Cassio that, or he's going to get Othello to think that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair, right? That is the idea that Iago has, right? And he's going to do it while pretending to be Othello's friend, right? He says here, the Moor is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest, that but seem to be so, and will be as tenderly led by the nose as asses are, right? So he is going to take advantage of Othello's trust in order to do this, right? So we'll be talking about this a lot more as the play goes on, right? But Iago in this play takes the role of the devil, right? Because, well, he pretends to be Othello's friend when in reality he wants to sabotage him. Right? So that is Iago's role here. And we'll be hearing a lot more about this guy as we go along. So, that brings us to the end of Act 1, guys. And what you need to do by the end of the day is, of course, answer my question about the Duke's saying and everything like that. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to post 2 videos, right? Because I think, well, I'm worried about the calendar, let's just say, right? So I'm going to post a second video about Act 2 below this one, right? I figure it'd be better to post 2 videos rather than one, like, 2-hour video for you guys, or more like an hour. So I'm going to end this video here, and what you now have to do after you finish this question is you need to read Act 2 so that you can watch the next video. Okay, so I'm going to post that now. See you there.